his ramblings, his speeches now are almost twice as long as they used to be. He's, again, not a clinical psychologist or an MD, but he's cursing a lot, which I understand happens when people get really old and disoriented.
Okay, so for those people, Fred, who say you and your sister Mary, you're people who are living off the links you have with the Trump phenomenon, and they don't like it very much. What do you say to that?
What do I say? For decades and decades, I have stayed silent. I can't speak for my sister.
Yeah,
I stayed silent. I have my wife, Lisa, and my three children. We lead a very quiet life, even though I was in a very rough business, the real estate business in New York City, but it was never our thing. And yes, people will ask, why all of a sudden have you come out and written a book? My answer is simple. Lisa and I thought about it, and as you may know, and I understand you are reading my book, my young son, William, who's 25, has complex disabilities. About 8 years ago, we started really thinking of the idea of writing a book specifically about William and the issues surrounding someone with such immense medical and physical issues. But it never really caught on in any of the people we brought it to. It's a tutorial more than anything. So we dropped it for a while, and we didn't want to let it go. And I started thinking of ways that I could expand it just about William. And the original concept was to honor my father, Fred, who passed away way too early, who was a very caring and charismatic guy, and William, who is the most courageous and inspirational person I know, and who's really opened the door for me to advocate on behalf of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But to do that, I really wanted to tell the story of my entire family, the Trump family.
yeah.
Every family is complicated. Ours may be a bit to the extreme, and to do that, obviously, Donald is sort of the lodestone for decades in the family. The reason,
Let's just hear. Can I? Sorry to interrupt, Fred, but let's just a little bit about this incredible dynamic you have within the family, and also importantly, the place of your dad, Fred, who
right?
was the oldest son of your grandparents.
Yeah, yeah. Dad was the second oldest child, but the oldest son, and he had a dream to becoming an airline pilot. He was very much the black sheep of the family, a free spirit, loved by all. But he didn't want a part of the family business, which my grandfather couldn't understand. And Donald certainly demeaned my father for not only wanting to become an airline pilot, but it led to my father's alcoholism. Now, I don't know if you have the show Succession over in the UK, but the premise basically is three children are looking to take over the father's business. My father wanted no part of that. In
Mm.
fact, he gave Donald the entryway to be working with my grandfather and getting what Donald wanted. My father wanted no part. But Dad was looked down upon that. In fact, with that paired with his heavy drinking, he became the embarrassment of the family, if you will, even though he was the one with the most personality and empathy of any of them.
And it wasn't a family that was, shall we say, overburdened with empathy. Your grandfather, also called Fred, was well, frankly, he comes across as something of an ogre. Have I got that right?
There was not much hugging and kissing going on in the family, that's for sure. It was a very unemotional dynamic within the family, other than with, frankly, my mother and my father, who were very caring to us. But, my grandfather pitted each child against each other. And that may have been the way he was brought up. I don't know. But that's what he did. Each child was pitted against the other to see who would come out on top. And you could choose what you want to define as on top, but in Donald's mind, he became the star of the family.
There is no doubt that the birth of your son, William, obviously hugely significant for you and your immediate family, but the reaction of the rest of the Trumps is very, very telling. Just describe how it all unfolded.
William was born, well, typical birth. First day was absolutely fine, and then all of a sudden issues arose, and William started having hundreds of seizures a day. And he was between three hospitals. He was in a neonatal intensive care unit for 7 total weeks. Not once did any of my aunts or uncles who lived very close to the first hospital he was in Manhattan, did they ever come to visit or even call, except one time. And if you've gotten past this part of the story, I went to dinner. My grandmother actually reached out to me because I reached out to her, said, I have some relatives in from Scotland. Would you mind having dinner? You and Lisa should probably go out and just have some time away from the hospital. And we did. And as we walked into the restaurant towards our table, Donald and Melania were to our left. I still can envision it perfectly. And he just said, without standing up or coming over to us, hey, I hear your kid's really sick. And that was that. And, when William came home a while later, I received a letter from Donald's attorney saying, in essence, that my sister and I were taken out of my grandfather's will. And in the end, it was Donald who had hatched a plan to do that because he was in very bad financial straits at the time, bankruptcies. It was so embarrassing that the banks had to put him on an allowance. But the real telling part about Donald's character was when my father died in 1981, Donald was named my trustee. I take that to mean that you're going to protect the interest of the person you're the trustee for, and that was me and my family. Donald did the exact opposite. In fact, he trod upon the memory of his dead brother. He took advantage of his father who had dementia, and he basically attacked me during the most vulnerable time of my life while my son was at home still fighting for his life.
It all is deeply unpleasant. And we should say this is all, well, at what stage of his political career was your Uncle Donald at this time?
Oh, when William was in the early 2000s, he had always taught. I mean, he was very involved in politics, the local politicians, mostly to try to get benefit for his business, like anybody else in Manhattan does. I certainly can't hold that against Donald. Everybody does it.
Hmm.
But his real ambitions started probably in the late 2000s. I know in 2011, he kind of threw his name out there and he was rising in the polls. And he finally decided that, a popular president in Obama, it wasn't the time for him.
Is it true? I know you write about this in the book, that it was the roast, it was the roasting your uncle got from Obama at a formal dinner that properly concentrated his mind on the idea of running for the presidency?
Yes, it was at the annual correspondence dinner where the president of the United States gets roasted by a host. I think it was Seth Meyers that year. And Donald was in the audience. And actually, I was in this room where I'm speaking to you right now with my wife watching it. And when Obama started going after Donald and I said to her, that's it. They awoke the sleeping giant. There was no way Donald was going to let that go. And he made it his mission to get back at Obama.
At what point, and perhaps it wasn't until election night in 2016, but at what point did the family realize that this man was going to become US president?
Well, certainly Donald's children wanted it to happen. I'm not going to speak for the rest of us, although Mary certainly has voiced her own opinion. I didn't think he was going to do it. And as much as I as much as Donald hates to be labeled a loser, I'm not so sure he wanted to win either. We kind of joked that it was a branding exercise for him, just a way to make money on it. Little did we know that he was probably going to make more money while in office and then when he left office. But I never really thought he was going to win up until that early morning when Hillary Clinton gave in and gave a concession speech to him.
You voted for Hillary Clinton, didn't you?
I did, even though I still say she was a flawed candidate
Mm.
and ran a poor campaign. As well as she knew Donald, she didn't know him as well as I do. If there's two things Donald and I share is a love for golf, and we are relentless. And there was no way anything Hillary Clinton do could match his energy. And in the end, that's why he won.
Yeah. There are some interesting photographs in the book of you with your uncle in the Oval Office. So presumably you were back on reasonable terms with him, were you, when he was elected to the presidency?
Yes, after our lawsuit was settled in 2000, we Donald invited me to become an honorary member at his golf course in Westchester, which is 20 minutes from where I live here. And I said the only way I would do that is if we played around the golf together. And we did, and we played dozens and dozens of times over the years. And when the round was over, we had lunch, and as we're leaving in the parking lot, he said, "We're done, right?" And many people say, "Done." Does that mean that's the end of your relationship? And no, it wasn't. It was his way of saying, "Let's bury the hatchet and move forward." And we did for many years. And when he became president, I knew, and my wife Lisa knew, that this was our chance to, on a more national level, advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. And
Yeah.
we started literally 3 months after he was inaugurated. We started meeting with cabinet secretaries and other government officials, culminating in what is now, I guess, become somewhat of a famous meeting in the Oval Office, where I escorted a group called Equally Alive, just a wonderful group of uh, MDs and other professionals that we spoke to. Alex Azar, who was the head of Health and Human Services, and it culminated in a meeting in the Oval Office. And after 45 minutes, we thought we made some progress. Meeting ended. Donald called me back in, greeted me with his familiar, "Hey, pal, how's it going?" We chatted for a minute or so, and he said, "You know, those people," meaning the disabled community, "those people, all the expenses, they should just die." And it was something I really couldn't respond to at the time. I wasn't expecting that at all, because part of the meeting was to figure out a way how to lessen the expenses and yet get better services for this very large population in this country, 60, 70 million people. So that was very disconcerting, to say the least. And in the end, nothing came about it. And just to get back to the character issue, if you don't mind, Jane, it would have been gracious of Donald if he said after he was elected, "You know what? I know what you and Lisa are going through with William. I know you're advocating on behalf of millions of people. Whatever you need, you've got it."
Yeah.
That would have been nice. Was
Well,
I was I happy to do it on my own and go that way? Sure. But it would have been great if he, from the very beginning, just backed us up.
so where we are now, it's relatively early October of 2024. He could win the presidency again.
Yes.
And I imagine that you'll be voting for his opponent again.
Yes.
Are you
I've made that very clear.
Do you think Kamala Harris is a better candidate than Hillary Clinton was?
She's a different candidate, for sure. Hillary had been in the public domain much more than Kamala Harris has. I will say this, yes, I think she's a better candidate. I think in a way, it's benefited her for having a short amount of time to ramp up her campaign, and she's doing so. And I believe in her policies. I believe she will be a great advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. As I said, I will vote for her and I will campaign for her if I'm asked to do so. We have 1 month from today, 1 month from today, for the election.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm interpreting what you've said as damning with slightly faint praise. You don't sound overconfident, Fred. If
Oh,
I
I think she's a fine candidate. I just, the way this country is right now, it is so polarized, and the election as it stands right now is so close. She's doing what she needs to do to get out there. I don't mean to sound that I'm faint of heart. No, I back her 100%.
okay,
The
it,
reality is a very close election right now.
reading the book, your uncle Donald Trump comes across as mean-spirited, cruel, thoughtless, a man who will always clutch victory from the jaws of defeat, or actually just claim victory when in fact he hasn't won. We all know what he's
Never,
done.
never admits defeat.
Right. Okay. He's also a convicted felon. He's been found liable in a civil court for a sexual assault. He routinely tells lies. He makes things up, and his public speeches, his appearances are quite incoherent and often rambling. I mean, do you think he's all right?
I always have to disclaim I am no physician, so I have no right to make a clinical diagnosis. I can just say that my grandfather, his father, suffered serious dementia for years. His first cousin, John Walters, also had dementia. And my Aunt Marianne, his older sister at the end of her life, absolutely exhibited signs of dementia. Now, I say that just from anecdotes of living through my grandfather's year-long battle with it. My other grandfather, my mom's father, also had dementia. So I know what it looks like. Yes, his ramblings, his speeches now are almost twice as long as they used to be. He's, again, not a clinical psychologist or an MD, but he's cursing a lot, which I understand happens when people get really old and disoriented. Um, so he is a different person, certainly than when I knew him growing up. There's no doubt about that. He's always been full on, but it's getting sad to watch him. He looks tired, and the vile things that are coming from him now, embarrassing for me and my tight family here.
Yes, but the plain fact is, Fred, he could win again. I suppose that's what amazes so many of us, is that he is in a position where it isn't inconceivable that for all his faults and all his obvious frailties, he could still win.
Yes, and I can't understand it. I just, his base isn't going anywhere. It doesn't matter what you say to them. And Donald's a genius at that too. He started off as a populist, like, hey, I'm here to back you up, and people bought it hook, line, and sinker, and they believe all the lies that he throws out there. Um, it's a country that I never thought I would be living in right now, but it is, and we've got to get through it and move forward. And only Kamala Harris can move us forward in a civil, positive way.
And when you see people like Elon Musk, for example, he's attached himself very firmly to the Trump cause. Does that worry you too?
Sure. I mean, just think of all the government contracts Elon Musk company has. SpaceX and Starlink and military contracts. Yeah, it's disturbing. And he's a man of huge influence, and yet he still will throw out the lies that this will be if Donald loses, that's the last election that's ever going to happen. I guess we've been taught to call that projection, meaning that they're saying that about the Democrats when it's actually the Republicans are the ones that stand the chance of ruining and changing our democracy or ending it.
Do you are you sleeping well at the moment, Fred? I mean, I don't, I don't know what your personal situation is, but I mean, there are lots of us over this side of the Atlantic who, frankly, are a little bit frazzled about events in the world generally. This is not an easy time anywhere. Uh,
Anyway,
and I think there is a lot of concern about what might happen in the American election. Are you fearful?
yes, I am. I absolutely am. And you can see it starting already where some local election boards are saying, okay, if Donald loses, we're not going to certify that.
Mm.
I I foresee sort of the same way it started last time in 2000, I'm sorry, 2020. Just it'll turn into a judicial process and God forbid it goes into something violent again. There's no place for violence in this country or in any country, be it political or otherwise. But yes, I'm very fearful.
And the only way, I guess, that could be prevented is if Donald Trump wins, which could happen, or if Kamala Harris wins by a big enough number and wins the Electoral College, so that it couldn't be challenged even by Donald Trump's most fervent supporters. But to be honest, that doesn't seem a likely prospect, does it? A thumping Kamala Harris win.
No, it doesn't seem likely, and I'll push back a little bit, Jane. Even if she has a significant victory, he's not going to give in right away. It's just not going to happen. I know him too well. It won't happen. Uh, for those who know me, I'm a huge Godfather fan. I think what's going to have to happen is, yes, some decisive win, but I think it's going to be the Republican Party just having enough of all the losses under Donald, during midterm elections and things of that nature. There's a great scene where Michael Corleone's father's closest friend says, you need a war every 5 or 10 years. And I don't mean a physical war. I mean, there's got to be a way to cleanse the blood out of the Republican Party. This is a two-party system. I get it. That's the way we were founded. We need two healthy parties. We have one that is not healthy right now.
Is JD Vance in a position where he could play the role of Mike Pence? Let's say Kamala Harris does win, your Uncle Donald isn't prepared to concede, and JD Vance plays the role of Mr. Reasonable and says, "Look, we have to concede," and then that puts him in the box seat to be the next Republican candidate. What do you think about that?
I have yet to see anything reasonable about JD Vance. I think he will do what he's not only said, but intimated. He will not necessarily play the role of Mike Pence. And it took quite a bit to get Mike Pence to do what he did. I mean, he first of all, what he did was great, but that was his job. That was his only job was to certify that election.
Yeah.
Okay, so we all need to understand that.
When Fred, I've got to finish now in a second, I know, but when did you last speak to your uncle, Fred?
The day he said that my son should just die.
Right. You've never exchanged a word since. By the way, I don't blame you, but that was the last time.
Yeah, that was the last, and that was the last time. Yes.
How is William doing?
Thank you for asking. William's doing fine. We have our challenge is to find a meaningful day program for William and for others like him. Once a child leaves school age, 21, 22, all bets are off basically, and that's one of the main things that I am advocating for is better caregiver funding and better caregiver training, housing issues, and better prevention methods to try to deal with issues that a child may have, be it autism or a genetic mutation like William has, KCNQ2, just to deal with those early on. And the world has changed since William was born 25 years ago. The information is out there, and we try to reflect that in the book. That if anyone has any issues, they have to advocate on behalf of themselves and their children.
Yeah, I think many people over this side of the Atlantic will absolutely get that, Fred, and hugely appreciate what you and Lisa are trying to do. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Very best of luck to you all. Thank you.